Good morning, students. In the last class, we have seen the presentation of a genitourinary fistula, what are the causes and what are the investigations we have done and how we have prepared the patient for surgery. Today, we will discuss the surgery of genitourinary fistula. So, what is the definite preparation? What did you do in preparation of the patient? The patient, any general condition like anemia should be treated, any infections they have to be treated, and the overall general condition of the patient should be improved. And after that, when we will plan for surgery. So before we start the surgery, what is the most important thing is the timing of the surgery. So usually when is the time we plan a surgery? The ideal time for surgery is usually between 6 weeks to 3 months after delivery of the patient. Because we are talking about obstetric fistula here, I am telling you regarding obstetric fistula, and also we will discuss gynecological fistula also. But the ideal time for repair is 6 weeks to 3 months after delivery of the baby. Between this time, we have to improve the general condition of the patient. The local tissues should be treated for any infection. And if we wait for more than 3 months, what is the problem with that? There will be more fibrosis around the margin of the fistula. And not only that, it also leads to more problem for patient. Patient is already in problem and patient is suffering. So it will further lead to more suffering of the patient. So it should be planned between 6 weeks to 3 months. And in case of uncomplicated fistula with no infections or scarring at the margins of the tissue, we can do it as early as even before 6 weeks. In case of surgical fistula, if it is recognized during the surgery within 24 hours, it can be repaired immediately. Otherwise, it has to be repaired after 10 or 12 weeks. And in case of radiation fistula, a minimum period of 12 months is required to repair the fistula. So what is the route of repair of the fistula? I hope you all remember the fistula. It is a communication, epithelial communication between two or more epithelial surfaces. It is a communication between two or more epithelial surfaces, and we are talking about a communication between the vagina and the urinary tract. That is the bladder, urethra, or the ureter with the vagina. But we now what we are seeing is vesicovaginal fistula, which is a fistula tract between the bladder and the vagina. So depending on the site and site of the fistula, we have to plan the route of the repair. Whether it can be done through transvaginal route or it has to be done by abdominal route. Abdominal route are two types, which is transperitoneal and transvesical, through the bladder and from the peritoneum. So depending on the site of the fistula and the mobility of the vagina, we have to plan accordingly. What are the advantages for vaginal route? There is less blood loss, less morbidity, and short hospital stay. Also, urethral stents can be placed through the vaginal route whenever they are needed. So what are the other routes of repair of bladder fistula? They are transperitoneal route, which is done in case of uterine fistula, fistula between the bladder and the vagina, or in case of ureteric fistula. Transvesical is high fistula in the bladder. They can be repaired from the above through the bladder. And transperitoneal or transvesical route approach is preferred when the fistulous margins are close to the ureteral orifices. This is done for proper dissection and to avoid any type of injury to the ureter. This approach is also used when there is ureteroneocystostomy is done or anomental graft is used. We'll come to what is ureteroneocystostomy later on. Now, what are the suture materials? Not only the route and the time of repair, even the suture material which you are using is also important. So you have to know what is used for vagina, what is used for ureter, what is used for bowel. So Vicryl 20 is preferred for both bladder as well as vagina, whereas for ureter we use PDS. PDS 40 on a 13 mm round-bodied needle is used for ureter. For bowel surgery, PDS 30 on a 30 mm round-bodied needle. And the preferred surgery is local method by flap splitting method is the technique of surgical repair of the fistula. So what are the principles of the surgery? How do you go about the surgery? A perfect asepsis should be maintained, fistula should be exposed adequately, and scar tissue around the margins of the fistula should be excised, and adequate mobilization of the bladder wall should be done from the vagina. Vagina and the bladder wall should be mobilized, and the in between the fistulous tract should be excised. And bladder should be sutured in 2 layers without any tension. The first layer is sutured with 20 vicryl on a 30 needle, and interrupted sutures are done excluding the bladder mucosa. The second layer, same suture, where taking the muscle and the facial layer, and the first suture line is buried during the second suture. See, this is how, this is the fistulous tract, and the straight one is the line of incision, and this tract around the fistula is incised, and even these flaps above and below are also incised. They are opened, and they have to be, the margins are trimmed neatly. Any fibrosis or anything along the margins should be cut. Now the bladder, the opening in the bladder is sutured in 2 layers. The first layer where the mucosa is excluded, and it is taken through the, from without muscle we have to take this, sorry, without mucosa, excluding the mucosa, the first layer of suture is taken with Vicryl 20, and these are interrupted sutures. So these are the interrupted sutures which we are taking, and this is the second layer which includes the muscle and the facial layer, and these are also interrupted sutures. In this, the second layer will bury the first layer of the suture, and this is the finally the rent in the vagina. Even this which we have cut, this is also closed with Vicryl 20, and this is how finally it will appear after the repair of the bladder. So next, after second layer of bladder is sutured, then vagina is also approached in the same manner using Vicryl number 0, and interrupted sutures are done even for vagina, and closure should be watertight without any holes in between, and further it is tested by installation of dye into the bladder by the end of the operation, and we should not see any kind of dye spilling out. And you have to maintain a continuous bladder drainage for at least 10 to 14 days with a catheter. This is how the repair is done. And what are the modifications in vaginal operations? When the ureteric openings are very close to the margin of the fistula, then you have to introduce, prior to the repair, you have to introduce the ureteric catheter, and then you have to go about the procedure. And if any bladder neck is involved, then suprapubic or vaginal cystostomy should be done as a temporary urinary diversion procedure, because to make the suture line or suture line from getting wet after the procedure, so that the healing will be better. And if there is any associated CPT, CPT is complete perineal tear, and RVF is rectovaginal fistula. Any associated complete perineal tear or rectovaginal fistula are present, they can be repaired in the same sitting, but first repair of VVF is done, followed by CPT or RVF. Then next, what another method of repair is saucerization, which is called paring and suturing. What is paring? Paring is, you have to trimming in a thin layer, where a thin layer of the tissue is removed and it is trimmed neatly, so that the edges are free of any fibrosis or any infection or any or a new blood supply is established along the trimmed margins. That is called as paring. Like the way you peel potatoes in a thin layer, that is how you have to trim the margins of the fistula in a very thin layer, so that healthy tissue remains and adequate blood supply is maintained. And after that marring of the margins, so it has to, the fistula is sutured with silver wire. This is actually, this method is devised by James Marion Sims in 1852. That is why and he has used sim speculum in sim's position. So his name is given to the speculum as well as the position in which he used to repair. So they are called as sim speculum and sim's position in which the fistula is repaired. After paring of the margins, suturing of the fistula is done with a silver wire. And closure of small fistula with interrupted sutures without, and here the bladder and the vagina are not at all dissected from each other, where no dissection of bladder and vaginal mucosa will take place. Simply closure of the fistula with a interrupted silver wire is done. Or nowadays we are using Picryl 20. And what is Latsko's technique of repair? This is also used to repair vesicovaginal fistula that develops after total abdominal hysterectomy operation. And the technique used in this is partial colpoclesis, which is called as obliteration of the vagina around the fistula. This is done for small and high fistulas which are situated in the vagina. Sometimes we can even use grafts or interpositional flaps. Grafts are used because the size of the fistula is big and grafts have adequate blood supply. To improve the blood supply to the tissue, or when the size of the fistula is very big, we use grafts or interpositional flaps to fill the space in between. Whatever dead space is there, that has to be filled for adequate healing of the tissues. Then one such type of graft is Marcius graft. Marcius graft is formed from bulbocavernosus muscle and labial fat. Labial fat pedicle graft can also be used in case of bladder neck fistulas. Laparoscopic repair technique and other grafts are also there, where omental flap is used, peritoneum is used, or another muscle, gracilis muscle, can also be used as a flap. And laparoscopic repair of the fistula is done only in selected cases. And what are the special post-operative care you have to take? Urinary antiseptics should not be given randomly, but they can be given after an appropriate sensitivity report. And continuous non-blood, it is bladder drainage. Continuous bladder drainage should be maintained for at about 10 to 14 days. Next, the patient is advised to pass urine frequently. Once the catheter is removed, she has to pass urine every 1 hour, and later on, the time interval can gradually be increased. And nursing care should be done, where fluid should be maintained, urine output, and catheter should be checked for any block. Now, what will you advise the patient once the patient is discharged? In case of obstetric fistula, she has to pass urine frequently every 1 hour, and later on interval can be increased, and she has to avoid intercourse for at least 3 months after the repair of the fistula, and pregnancy should not be planned at least till 1 year after the repair of the fistula. And in case conception occurs, then regular antenatal checkups should be done at a hospital, and hospital delivery is preferred, and preferably it should be a abdominal delivery, that is cesarean. And if there is a failure in the repair, it can be deferred until 3 months after delivery of the baby. So what are the criteria which are used for successful repair? Criteria will depend, our good prognosis, it depends on the number of fistula, whether it is single, and if it's a vesicovaginal fistula, it has good prognosis. Size of the fistula less than 4 centimeters. Any urethral involvement, whether it is there or not. How will you look for urethral involvement? By patency of the urethra is seen by passing a metal catheter through the external uretary meatus into the bladder. And if there is any fistula, it will come out through the opening in the vagina. So that is how you will check for patency of the urethra, whether urethra is involved or not. Next is vaginal scarring. What is the extent of fibrosis or vaginal scarring? And any tissue loss if it is present, and if it requires any graft. If tissue loss is there, you can use grafts. And ureteral involvement, whether ureters are involved or not, and what is the defect. So these all criteria are used to define the prognosis of the case. And how will you manage a gynecological vesicovaginal fistula? Gynecological vesicovaginal fistula repair is same as we have seen. Saucerization in case of small fistulas, In case of big fistulas, you can use that flap technique where it is first the bladder fistula is repaired, next the rent in the vagina is repaired, and or Ladskos technique where partial colpoclasis of the vagina is done if the fistula is very small and high in the vagina. So what are the other, one is the time during which gynecological VVF is repaired. If it is detected during the operation, we can repair it immediately in 2 layers. If it is detected in the post-operative period, then a catheter should be placed for 10 to 14 days and we should look for spontaneous closure of the fistula. If it is small, it will close spontaneously. Otherwise, repair can be done after 3 months. And in case of malignant or post-radiation fistula, I have already told you, you have to wait at least for a period of 12 months. And any of the following can be used for relief of the symptoms like ileal bladder, anterior exenteration, or colpoclasis. And in case of infective fistula, then we have to give antibiotics for specific infection following local repair. Now we have seen, till now we have seen VVF, vesicovaginal fistula. Now we will talk about urethrovaginal fistula. This is a communication between the urethra and the vagina. The causes are same as those of vesicovaginal fistula. What are the causes of VVF? The causes are acquired and congenital causes. In the acquired, there are obstetrical causes, gynecological causes. And what are the obstetrical causes for VVF? They are either ischemic or traumatic. Ischemic in case of obstructed labor and traumatic in case of any instrumental delivery or during operative procedures like forceps delivery, or any instrumental vaginal delivery or operative procedures like craniotomy or any other thing which is done. So these are the traumatic ways, and ischemic ways where there is ischemic necrosis with sloughing of the tissue, infection followed by sloughing of the tissue and formation of fistula, which is seen usually in case of obstructed labor. So what are the causes? They are acquired, congenital. In acquired, they are obstetric and gynecological causes. Obstetric causes are again divided into two, ischemic and traumatic. And ischemic is obstructed labor and traumatic is any instrumental vaginal delivery or any surgical procedures which are done for delivery are traumatic methods. And now gynecological causes. What are all the gynecological causes? First is during gynecological operations. It is termed as operative injury. Next is traumatic because of any trauma or because of any malignancies, post-radiation fistulas, and lastly, infections. These are all the gynecological causes. So the same will apply here also, even in urethrovaginal fistulas, where a part of the urethra or the whole of the urethra is involved along with bladder. In case there are small isolated fistulas which are not associated with VVF injury, these are usually seen during anterior colporrhaphy, urethroplasty operations, sling operations for stress incontinence. During this, we can usually observe a small isolated fistulas, or we can sometimes find residual fistulas after repair of vesicovaginal fistulas. After following the repair of vesico-urethrovaginal fistula, sometimes you leave behind a part that will form as urethrovaginal fistula. So how will you diagnose this? Diagnosis first from, I always told you diagnosis should start from history. So the patient will complain of urge to pass urine, but it dribbles into the vagina during the act. And how will we confirm it? When we pass a metal catheter through the external urinary meatus into the bladder, it will comes out through the communicating vaginal opening. So this is a definitive diagnosis. In case there is any confusion in diagnosis, we can do a 3-swab test to ascertain the site of the fistula. And treatment is surgical repair should be done in 2 layers as we have seen. And continuously the bladder should be drained for 10 to 14 days. Surgical repair is done in 2 layers. The urethral repair is done in 2 layers, followed by repair of the vagina in a single layer. And same Vicryl 20 is the suture material which is used. Now, prior suprapubic or vaginal cystostomy should be done for better success. In case the fistula is situated high up, you can do suprapubic or vaginal cystostomy where the urine is drained through suprapubic method or through a vaginal cystostomy. And where if there is a complete destruction of urethra, then what you do? You do a urethroplasty, which is reconstruction of urethra. It's called urethroplasty. And the success rate of after the success rate of curing this after first operation is 80% is the success rate of this operation with a failure rate of 10%. And 10% cases, the patient can complain of stress urinary incontinence. Now we come to a most important topic, which is ureteric injury in gynecological surgery. This is very important, even from examination point of view. So, how is the ureter injured during gynecological surgeries? And why do we have to address this issue of ureteric injury? Because it has high morbidity. Not only that, it is an important cause for litigation in today's time. Most of the medical legal cases are because of ureteric injuries during surgeries. So there is a need to address this issue. What are the most common causes which will cause ureteric injuries? They are either acquired and congenital causes. Any cause is divided always into two types. It is acquired, congenital mostly. And in other cases, there are also iatrogenic causes. So now we will see what are the acquired causes for ureteric injury. What are the acquired causes? They are common and usually follow trauma during pelvic surgery. Acquired causes are the most common causes of ureteric injury than congenital, and they are usually seen after a trauma during pelvic surgeries. And what are the associated surgeries which usually cause ureteric injuries? They are abdominal hysterectomy, which is done for cervical fibroids or a broad ligament fibroid, or we do a hysterectomy in case of endometriosis where we see extensive pelvic adhesions. So in such cases also, sometimes inadvertently, we might injure the ureter. Also in ovarian malignancy where the malignancy spreads to the ureter, or after a radical hysterectomy. Radical hysterectomy is done usually in case of endometrial cancer or cervical cancer. So when we do a radical hysterectomy, then we have to mobilize all the tissues and look for any metastasis. So during that time also, we might inadvertently cause an injury to the ureter. Or when thermal energy is used where with a unipolar or a bipolar during laparoscopic hysterectomy. And what are the congenital causes? Congenital causes are where there is an aberrant ureter which opens directly into the vagina or uterus or into the urethra. These are the congenital causes. Now, what is the incidence of ureteric injuries? Because of close location, the injury to the ureter is not uncommon during gynecological injury, and the incidence is 0.5 to 1% of all the pelvic operations. And 75% are injuries are seen during gynecological operations, and 75% mostly occur during abdominal gynecological procedures only. And what are the important anatomical locations where there is a chance of ureter being injured? One is at the infundibulopelvic ligament. See, this is the course of the ureter. At the infundibulopelvic ligament, the ureter is almost parallel to that of the ovarian artery, and here it forms the posterior boundary of the ovarian fossa. So there is a more chance for it being injured in case if there is any malignancy of the ovary or there is any inflammation involving the ovary, it might spread to the ureter and cause ureteric injury. Because here it runs parallel to the ovarian artery and forms the posterior boundary of the ovarian fossa in the upper part here. The ureter is almost parallel to the artery and it forms the posterior boundary of the ovarian fossa. The next location is, the next one is deep in the pelvis. Deep in the pelvis, below the ischial spine, it lies lateral to the uterosacral ligament. Here we will see. So this is the area. This is the area where there is the uterus. Posteriorly, here, this is the area where there is uterosacral ligament. So here it will rise lateral to the peritoneum of the, so here it is lateral to the peritoneum of the uterosacral ligament. So here also, see, there is, ureter is passing here. So this is the level where there is uterosacral ligament. So here it is lying lateral. So sometimes we might, while dissecting the peritoneum, here we might injure the ureter. That is deep in the pelvis below the level of spines. Next location is at the level of the internal os, where the ureter is 1.5 centimeters lateral to the cervix. And uterine artery here crosses above the ureter. See, this is the position where it is lying 1.75 centimeters from the internal os. This is the location of the internal os, and here it is lies 1.5 centimeters lateral to the os, and here this is the uterine artery which is crossing above the ureter. This is also the most common place where ureter is injured. Next location is this part where it turns medially to enter the urinary bladder. Over the anterior vaginal fornix in the ureteric tunnel, where it turns medially and anteriorly to enter the bladder. Next location is the intravesical part. So this is the next common part where it turns medially and enters the ureteric tunnel to enter the urinary bladder. The next one is inside the bladder. The transvesical part is the next common one. Intravesical part where it transverses to the bladder musculature. And lastly, if there are any congenital malformations where there is duplication of ureter, and these duplex ureters are most vulnerable to injuries at any of these sites. So what are the 5 sites we have seen? Firstly, this is where it runs parallel to the ovarian vessels. The next one is deep in the pelvis here, where it lies lateral to the uterosacral ligaments. Next location is 1.5 centimeters away from the cervix, where it is crossed by the uterine artery. Next location is the where it turns medially to enter the bladder, urinary bladder here. This part which will go in the over the anterior vaginal fornix. It lies in the anterior vaginal fornix, turning medially and anteriorly to enter the bladder. This is the part where it is injured in the ureteric tunnel. Fifth one is inside the bladder when it traverses through the bladder musculature. And finally, if there are any congenital malformations, it can be injured. And what are the nature of ureteric injuries? What are the types of ureteric injuries? It can be a simple kinking or angulation which will lead to obstruction of the ureter, or there can be an ischemic injury where the ureteral sheath is prone to damage, and it will, if the sheath is damaged, there is endangering of its blood supply. Then if the ureter is incorporated into a ligature, or it can be clamped. This clamping will lead to crushing injury leading to necrosis. Next is transection. Transection is partial or complete. You will sometimes without knowing, you might cut the ureter, either partial or completely. You might transect the ureter. Or segmental resection. Segmental resection can be planned segmental resection or accidental. Planned is when you are doing a radical hysterectomy for malignancy cases. It is planned segmental resection also. Sometimes you do. And sometimes there can be thermal injuries with either monopolar or bipolar. And injury during laparoscopic during laparoscopic surgery, when you use staplers, at that time also you can inadvertently put a stapler on the ureter and cause injury. So these are all the gynecological operations which will lead to ureteric injury, which are given even in your textbook. You can go through them. cervical fibroid, broad ligament, pelvic endometriosis, any pelvic adhesions, other things. Next, how will you diagnose? What are the signs and symptoms which a patient with ureteric injury present? The patient will usually be complaining of pain in the flank at the renal angle with fever. Then there is hematuria and abdominal distension and leakage of urine which is seen through the vagina. If the patient comes with any of these symptoms, and sometimes there can be peritonitis or ileus, or there can be a formation of retroperitoneal urinoma. So if the patient comes with any of these symptoms like fever, flank pain, hematuria, abdominal distension, then you should think of, and there is also a history of recent either pelvic surgery, trauma. The history will give, even the in recent history will suggest. Any recent history of pelvic surgery followed by all these symptoms should arise a suspicion of ureteric injury. Next, what are the investigations you will do to confirm the diagnosis of this injury? First, you have to start with history of the patient. If there is escape of the urine through the vagina following an operative procedure, and the patient will have an urge to pass urine, and she can also pass urine normally. So you have to first take a history whether there is any urine escaping through the vagina. Next, for diagnosis, a 3-swab test should be done to differentiate it from the vesicovaginal fistula, where 3 swabs are placed, one high up in the vagina, next in the mid-vaginal portion, and next one in the just above the introitus. And a dye, methylene blue dye, is instilled into the vagina, and you will take a, and next the patient is asked to walk for 5 minutes. Next, and after that, you ask the patient to lie down, take out the swabs and examine. So that is the 3-swab test, which will differentiate it from vesicovaginal fistula. Next, if it is confirmed that it is a ureteric injury on vesicovaginal fistula, then to further confirm the diagnosis, what we do is we do an intravenous indigo carmine test, where indigo carmine dye is injected intravenously, and if the urine turns blue, then it is a confirmatory diagnosis for ureterovaginal fistula. The other test which you can do is cystoscopy can be done to determine where is the fistula, on which side is it located, or the right side or the left side, and if there is no spurt of urine from the ureteric orifice on the affected side. The other tests are where a ureteric catheter is passed under cystoscopic guidance and obstruction is met at the site of injury. To determine the site of injury, this is done where ureteric catheter is passed under cystoscopic guidance. Next is an excretory urography is done to confirm the site of the fistula, and also you have to outline the tract in order to plan the surgery. Next, a renal ultrasound should be done, which is a non-invasive method for, and it is looked for any hydronephrosis or any retroperitoneal urinomas. If they are present, they can be confirmed by renal ultrasound, and a CT is done with a contrast, where contrast extravasation and also to outline the tract is done. And what are the preoperative detection, and what will you do in case you do detect a lateral? So if you detect preoperatively a ureteral laceration, then what you do? You do an indigo carmine dye test to see where, if you have any doubt regarding this, then it is confirmed with indigo carmine test. And next, if the ureter is kinked or ligated, instead of dye leakage, there is gradually increasing dilatation. So if there is a ureteral laceration, there is leakage of the dye, but if there is a kinking or ligated, then you will not see any leakage of the dye. Instead of leakage, you will see there is an increased dilatation. Now, how will you manage ureteric injury? Ureteric injury, the management is always preventive and operative. So, what are the steps to prevent ureteric injury? Preoperatively or intraoperatively, we should take adequate steps to prevent ureteric injury. These are: first, intravenous urography should be done preoperatively. If there is a pelvic tumor and you want to go for a surgery, you have to do an intravenous urography, preoperatively and ascertain the course of the ureter before proceeding to the operation. And during this process, if there is any congenital abnormality, it is also revealed. Then ureteral catheters can be placed preoperatively or intraoperatively for detection, not only for detection of the ureter, also for dissection, which we have to do around the ureter in case of any radical hysterectomies. Also, direct visualization and palpation of the ureter can be also be done throughout its entire course. Then uriglow. Nowadays, ureteric catheters with inbuilt light source are available in the market. We can introduce them into the ureters, and once they are inside the ureter, they will glow, and the course of the ureter can be very clearly seen for better localization. This uriglow technique is usually used in case of, nowadays they are using it mostly in case of total abdominal hysterectomy through laparoscopy. Laparoscopic abdominal hysterectomy, we can use such techniques. And also, adequate exposure of the pelvic organs should be done. Inadequate incision or inadequate exposure should be avoided, and difficult dissection should, because inadequate incision or inadequate exposure will cause the tissues to be dissected inadequately and also lead to difficult dissection. And in sometimes we have to do blind clamping and suturing in such cases. So this blind clamping or suturing is very, very dangerous. Meticulous care should be done during dissection not to damage the ureteric sheath, because the ureteric sheath has the blood supply. So we have to see that it is not damaged and blood supply is intact. Next, follow the important axiom of surgery. What is the important axiom of surgery? Important suture structures at risk of inadvertent injury. You have to realize where the important structures are located, and you have to be very careful during this dissection to avoid any type of injury to them, and carefully you have to dissect those structures and they have to be adequately exposed. Then avoid blind clamping of blood vessels. They have to be clamped after proper dissection and good exposure only. You should clamp the vessels. And operative management. What does operative management depend on? Again, the time of repair of the injury is very, very important. If it is detected during intra-op or post-operative procedure, then you have to look at the type and severity of the injury. Then look at the anatomical level at which the injury has occurred. And next you have to look at, in case you have decided that you have to repair at the same time, then you should try to mobilize the ureter and the bladder. And what is the pathology leading to injury? Pathology means whether it is injury because of kinking, ligation, or any injury because of damage to the ureteric sheath. You have to ascertain all the causes of this, and then you have to proceed to how to deal with each and every cause. And before that, before you plan on any of this, even the patient general condition and prognosis should also be kept in mind. Now, what are the principles of repair of the ureteric injury? If there is minimal or no damage to the ureteric sheath or its blood supply during dissection, so you have to take care not to damage the ureteric sheath and its blood supply during dissection, and ureter should be adequately mobilized from the bladder, and tension-free anastomosis should be done, and watertight closure should be done with PDS 40 on a 13 mm needle. And what are the numbers PDS 40? These indicate how thin the material is used. PDS 40 means it is very, very thin, and it is taken on a 13 millimeters needle, and it is very thin, so it will not usually cause any foreign body reaction during the post-operative period. So watertight closure is done with PDS 40 on a 13 mm needle, and next ureter should be catheterized. Then passive drain is placed at the anastomotic side to prevent any accumulation of urine, because it might lead to later on infections. So how is the injury managed? When recognized during operation, during the intraoperative period, if you recognize that there is some problem, then how will you manage that? If there is any ureteral sheath denudation, then no intervention. If it is not much, no intervention is needed. If you think a long segment is involved, then ureteral stenting should be done, and it is left like that. Ureteral stenting will lead to closure of the, it will repair a spontaneous repair of the denudation, whatever has occurred. And if there is ureteral kinking, kinking is angulation of the ureter. And this kinking is because of any closely placed sutures during repair, then immediately the sutures have to be removed and the anatomy should be restored. Next, ureteral ligation. If you inadvertently include the ureter during any ligation, then immediately the sutures are removed. Deligation of the sutures are done. Then you have to assess the viability of the blood flow and whether ureteric peristalsis can be seen or not. Otherwise, you can do ureteral stenting for repair of this. Next, if there is a crushing injury because of a clamp, then the clamp should be removed immediately. Now also you have to check for viability of the blood flow through the ureteric sheath. You have to look for ureteric peristalsis, and in case you find there is a need, then stenting of the ureter can also be done, and an extra peritoneal drain also can be placed to prevent any accumulation of urine. In case there is ureteric transection, if it is a partial transection, then a stent is placed in the ureter and repair is done using PDS 40. Repair should be done. Later on, ureteric catheterization is done to prevent accumulation of urine or for early repair. Next, if there is a complete transection of the ureter, then depending on the position where the ureter is transected, whether it is in the lower one third, then ureteroneocystostomy means where the ureter, the part where the ureter is cut, it is again placed into the bladder. It is called as ureteroneocystostomy. Is done where psoas muscle is used as a hitch over the ureteral stent. Hitch means it is used to close over the ureteral stent, and the stent is kept in place until it is completely healed. If it is in the lower one third, then you can you can place the ureter directly into the bladder and repair it. But if it is in the middle one third, then what do you do? In the middle one third, then you have to pass a ureteral stent, and if the if the ureter length is maintained and very short length of the ureter has to be transected, then it can be stented and end-to-end anastomosis can be done over the ureteral stent. This is called as ureterostomy, where end-to-end anastomosis is done and the both segment should be adequately mobilized. Sometimes in case of very complicated cases, then you have to do uretero-ileal interposition. What is this uretero-ileal interposition? Means a part of the ileum is used in place of ureter. Ileum is substituted for ureter, where long segment of ureter has to be resected. In such cases, ileum is used for ureter, where the bowel is then after ureter is formed from the ileal this thing, it is placed there, it is placed in the position of the ureter and end-to-end anastomosis is done. Then the repair in the, even there is an end-to-end anastomosis in the ileal, proximal and distal ends of the ileum from where the graft is removed. Next, ureteric implantation. If it is done into the bladder, it is called as ureteroneocystostomy, and it is done by a tension-free technique, and high mobilization of the bladder is needed, and the bladder dome is sutured to the psoas muscle. On that side is called bladder dome, is sutured to the psoas muscle as a layer which will help, which the psoas muscle will help in support of the bladder. This is called as psoas hitch. And to prevent vesico-ureteric reflux, ureter is implanted through the submucosal tunnel without any tension. And what is the bladder flap procedure, which is also called as Boeri flap, B-O-A-R-I, Boeri flap procedure is another name for this because it is done by scientist Boeri. It is done alternatively when the ureter is short or the injury is at the level of the pelvic rib. where an obliquely placed bladder flap is outlined. It is rolled into a tube and ureter is implanted into the tube, which will form the submucosal tunnel, and this is sutured without any tension, and now this is placed in the bladder. Alternatively, uretero-ilio-neocystostomy, where ureter is formed from the ileum and this ileum is now placed in the bladder is done. That is called as uretero-ilio-neocystostomy. And in case of any thermal injury to the ureter, depending on the severity, resection and then management according to the place of the transection, whether it is in the lower mid-third or in the middle one-third, then accordingly you need to repair it by the above procedures which I have just told you. Then what are the complications which will occur after a repair of the ureteric injury is done? Common complications are there are stricture formation, any infections, ureteric obstruction, there is reflux of the urine from the bladder into the ureter, or any complications to the stent or Bovary flap. Next thing we will see is the rectovaginal fistula. So now, what is a rectovaginal fistula? We have seen fistula means it is a communication between two or more epithelial surfaces. So rectovaginal fistula means it should also be a communication which is happening between the rectum and the vagina, and it is also an abnormal communication between rectum and vagina where there is involuntary escape of flatus or feces into the vagina. This is called as rectovaginal fistula. The causes for rectovaginal fistula are, they can either be acquired causes or congenital causes. Acquired causes are mostly because of trauma or injury. So now we will see just how there is an injury to the rectum. So this is the rectum. So in the upper part, in the anterior upper one third, it is, what is there in front of rectum? There is pouch of Douglas. Then in the lower part, this is the perineal body in the lower one third. In the upper one third is the pouch of Douglas, lower one third is the perineal body, and behind is the sacrum. This is the curvature of the sacrum. So what happens in case of obstructed labor? Usually obstructed labor occurs when there is when this sacral curvature is absent and sacrum is flat. So when the head, when it escapes through this vagina, the head which is here will crush the rectum in between the flat sacrum and this, and here. So rectum is encroached in between the, against the flat sacrum, and there might be an injury to the rectum. So this will lead to rectovaginal fistula, mostly seen in case of, again, obstructed labor. So what are the acquired causes? Are mostly obstetrical causes where there is an incomplete healing or unrepaired recent complete perineal tear, instrumental injury where destructive operations, or during operative vaginal delivery, destructive operations are craniotomy operations which are done for after coming head of the breech, or in case of shoulder dystocia, and operative vaginal deliveries are by forceps. Obstructed labor, if the sacrum is flat, there is compression effect of the head with the sacrum encroached with the, rectum encroached in between the sacrum and the head, which will cause pressure necrosis. Then later on, this necrosis will lead to infection. There is sloughing and formation of fistula. What are the gynecological causes? Gynecological